Bonjour, mes amis. Welcome to D20 Live's tutorial on Regime Diabolique. All for One Regime Diabolique is set in 1636 France, where Cardinal Richelieu controls Louis XIII like a puppet. France has entered the 30 Years' War, and you play as one of the King's Musketeers, the loyal troop of heroes and adventurers dedicated to protecting the King and France from danger. Also, there's werewolves. Did I mention that there were werewolves? Yeah, Regime isn't set in historical France. It's actually full of fantasy elements where you can fight monsters and demons and cults, and you can save peasants from anything from regular bandits to actual vampires coming in to try and destroy a town. It's a lot more versatile than a lot of other people would think that a game about musketeers would be. Regime describes itself as a swashbuckling type of adventures, and it's very true. It goes from anywhere between having to fight in a lot of different kind of combats, while at the same time also having a very social aspect to it. You can have a character who's purely a musketeer that only talks. He doesn't have to raise up any weapon whatsoever. Or you could have a completely opposite character that only fights and does no talking. So, how do you make a musketeer? Well, at the very top you have archetypes. Unlike normal class systems, this system actually is more of a guide to keep you in track to roleplay your character. And it helps you distinguish yourself from your other party members by picking key skills that you're focusing on. So, for example, you could have a duelist who focuses purely on just dueling one-on-one characters. Or you could have a spy who is purely meant to just try and figure information. You could have someone who leads. You could have someone who is a priest. You could actually have an alchemist. After that, you have the stats. You have 6 primary stats: body, charisma, strength, dexterity, willpower, and intelligence. But you only roll those if you don't have any skills that are actually attributed to those stats. So from there, you have 6 derived stats: initiative, defense, move, size, stun, and perception, which come into play as they're needed. Next, you have skills. Now, skills are attached to an attribute. So let's say you wanted to take linguistics. Linguistics is actually attached to the intelligence attribute. So you can take ranks in these skills so that way you can have a better linguistics. Now, if you don't actually have any ranks in these skills, that means you just take the attribute itself and roll that instead. So if you didn't actually take the linguistics skill, you can still roll, but you have to take a -2 penalty. Now, how the skill ranks actually work is that there's no rank where it's your base attribute at a -2 penalty. But at the same time, there's also rank 0, which means that you are trained in it, but you don't have any modifiers in it. So let's say that you were using your academics, right? If you had a rank 0 in academics, that means it's just your intelligence modifier with no other penalties or additives, right? So it's just, let's say your intelligence was 3. So you just roll 3 dice. Now, if you had a rank 3 in your academics, that means you add 3 to your intelligence modifier. Also in this game, you have things called talents and flaws, which are very similar to advantages and disadvantages in L5R. With talents, you have things like feats, where they give you special abilities during battle, or they can give you that extra edge in a social situation, or they're resources like allies, or just informants, or anything that you could think of, really. Flaws, while also giving your character a more dynamic role-playing experience, also have the ability to give you more style points, which I will explain in a little bit. First things first, though, I'm going to explain how the dice system rolls in this game. Now, theoretically, you could use any type of die in this entire game. You can use D6s, you could use D4s, you can use D10s, you can use D12s, you can use D20s. As long as it is an even-sided die, you can use that die to roll in Regime. The reason why? It's because it's basically a coin flip. You see, the thing about this system is that it's very similar to such systems as Scion or Exalted or Fate. The idea is to get as many successes as possible. However, what determines a success is actually different from any of those 3 games. So you know how in Scion, a success is determined whether or not you rolled an 8 or above on a d10? Well, in Regime, it's different. In Regime, you are only determining on whether or not the number that you rolled was either even or odd. The more evens you get, the more successes you get. As a side note, this is why you can't use the Fate Dice, because Fate Dice actually have 3 different results, and it doesn't necessarily work. The idea to do with your pool of successes is to get higher than the target number. The higher you get in your target number, the more degrees of success that you actually get. Yes, there are degrees of success and failure in this game. Now, if you actually get equal to the target number, you pass by the barest minimum, but you still succeed. If you get under the target number, you actually have a chance to re-roll at a -2 penalty. And trust me, you'll want to re-roll, because if you fail by a -5 degree or more, you have the potential to actually die. Now, you can re-roll at a -2. The idea at that point is to try and get as close to the target number as possible, because if you get a -1, you still fail, but you have the possibility of still making it out alive. Now, with the more degrees of success that you get above the target number, the more style points you might actually get, which I will get to in a second. Style points are similar, yet different, to fate points or hero points, but for some reason, these things are just so very silly. You can get them for basically anything if you roleplay well, if you make the GM laugh, if you succumb to a character flaw, if you're doing cool actions, or even if you bring snacks to the game. I'm not kidding you, it's actually on page 93 in this book. It's stupid. And to make matters worse for the GM, you can spend them on anything you want. You can add dice. You can reduce damage being taken. You can boost your talents. You can just do anything you want just to make the GM's life worse. Which brings us to combat. Combat is broken down into 3 simple moves. There's attacking, defending, and movement. You can do one of each during your turn without penalty. Initiative is actually really simple. You roll your dexterity plus your intelligence attribute together in your dice pool, and the person who gets the most successes goes first. Attacking is simple enough. You take the opponent's skill for attacking depending on how you like to do it. Christ, Mike, could you make it any less sexual?
No!
Anyway, ranged attacks use skills like athletics or gunnery, whereas bare fist fighting uses brawl. Regular melee uses fencing or weapons, depending on which type of archetype skill you want to take. Then, you take your weapon's damage rating and you add that to your dice pool. So, a heavy but powerful sword can have the same damage rating as a light but precise rapier. Now, you might be very confused at this next part because I am. It requires a lot of math, and boy do I hate math! You roll your weapons damage against your opponent's roll, which is their defense, which is derived of their body, plus their armor and dexterity, minus their size. As normal humans, your size should be 0, but that doesn't necessarily mean you didn't either take a flaw or a talent, which makes you either go up or down in your size. If you don't get higher than your opponent's defense, you miss entirely. If you tie, you actually clash, and it's all really big and cinematic. If you go over, each extra success adds 1 point of damage. Damage is lethal or non-lethal depending on the weapon, but that doesn't mean you can't die from non-lethal damage. Let's say you're unconscious and somebody is literally beating your unconscious body. That still means you can die. If you take too much damage in one hit, it can have varying effects, including getting knocked down, getting knocked out, or stunned if it actually surpasses your stun rating. How much health you have is determined by your body plus willpower plus size. Once that reaches 0, then you start taking negative penalty to your dice pool equal to the negative amount of health that you actually have. Once you hit -5 lethal damage, you are unconscious, and once you hit -5 lethal, you're dead. And that's it for this system. Thankfully, it's not a very difficult system to get around. It's just a lot of math that you have to keep track of, and thankfully the character sheet will remind you of a lot of things. Until next time, I'm Sam, the production manager, and all for one, and one for all.